Now to the Fox News voter fraud unit now. A retrial starts tomorrow in Shore, New York over the absentee ballot fraud scandal there. 8 Democratic officials and political operatives have been indicted. 4 pled guilty in what prosecutors say was a scheme to steal an election by faking absentee ballots and counting them as real votes. Meanwhile, in Michigan, Republican Governor Rick Snyder vetoed parts of a new law that supporters say would have prevented absentee ballot fraud. Could that open the door for potential voter fraud in November? Well, joining us from Lansing, Michigan's capital, is the Republican Speaker of the Michigan House, Jase Bolger. Mr. Speaker, welcome. Thanks for joining us this morning. First, what was your concern when it comes to absentee ballots?
Well, good morning, Eric. It's good to be with you. Our concern is making sure that valid voters can cast valid ballots. So we want to make sure that we are limiting our elections to those who are living as well as those who are U.S. citizens.
And why would anyone potentially be against that?
You know, the governor stated that he was worried about voter confusion. Many of the liberals, however, tried to argue about voter suppression. They tried to bring race into the argument, and that's, I think, just off base and misses the point. The point is the only people we want to exclude are the dead and the non-U.S. citizens.
Well, are there any records or evidence that the dead or non-U.S. citizens are voting in Michigan?
You know, unfortunately, our nonpartisan Auditor General did an audit and found that between 2008 and 2011, over 1,300 dead people cast ballots and about 50 imprisoned inmates cast ballots, neither of which should happen. So we do need to be sure that we make sure that we uphold the integrity of our elections. And I believe that valid voters are disenfranchised when invalid votes are cast.
Well, that's an interesting argument because, you know, critics always say that these type of laws disenfranchise minorities, the elderly. It's all aimed at voter suppression.
You know, I think that's very unfortunate. Our Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Bob Young, ruled that voter ID laws, in fact, do protect voters. They thereby prevent lawful voters from having their votes diluted by those who cast fraudulent voters. And our Chief Justice is not only a good legal scholar, he also happens to be an African American. He's looking out for the voters and making sure that valid votes are counted.
You know, when it comes to absentee ballots, do you worry about them? I mean, in Troy, New York, for example, the allegations is the politicians that, you know, they just fake them. We've seen convictions of these type of cases around the country where politicians would just fake absentee ballots. They voted for themselves, handed them in as real votes, and some of the controls that you would think would be there are not there when it comes to absentee ballots.
Yeah, I think every voter ought to be concerned about that. They ought to make sure that their vote counts, and the only way to be sure that their vote truly counts is making sure that only valid votes are cast. So I think that voter ID laws, the kind of laws that we're seeking to pass here in Michigan, are very important for valid voters, and I think that they protect the integrity of the outcome, which I think is very important for people's faith in their government.
And as we head into the race in November in the election, what concerns do you have, and do you think they have been or could be addressed?
Our concerns are we want to make sure that there's an honest election. We want to make sure that valid voters' votes are counted, and we want to be sure that nobody plays the kind of games that you're seeing in New York. We want to make sure that nobody tinkers with the result. We want to make sure that when people go to the polls, they know that their vote is going to count, and it's not going to be taken away by somebody that is seeking to subvert the process by casting ballots that should not count.
You know, when you have these cases where the process is subverted, I mean, you're a politician, you've run for office, you hold public office. What does it do to the integrity and the belief in our electoral system?
I think people need to believe that their vote is going to count, and it does count. We've seen many votes come down very close. I have not experienced one myself, but we've seen them go to recount and literally decided by 1 vote, 2 votes. So it's really disheartening for me when some have looked at other counties and we found 5 people who were deceased had cast votes. They said, well, that's not enough to reform the system. It's too much. Any invalid vote is too much. We need to be sure that we maintain the integrity of the system so that people know when they go to the polls, their vote will count.
All right, Jase Bolger, who's the Speaker of the Michigan House, we thank you for joining us this morning. Fascinating, especially when it comes to absentee ballots. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Eric.
And, of course, if you suspect voter fraud or problems where you live, we've got our address. There it is, voter fraud at foxnews.com. We read every single report that we get, and man, oh, man, are we getting a lot of them. Voter fraud at foxnews.com. Jamie?
Well, stocks